Hey, good afternoon to you. It is now 5:06 News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, former Biden stenographer Mike McCormick has a lot to say about the Biden family business, such as it is. He knows more about it than most. We'll chat with him about the latest there. And you can talk to us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. This afternoon, Joe Biden presenting the Presidential Medal of Freedom to such luminaries as Nancy Pelosi, Michael Bloomberg, Al Gore, and John Kerry. What the heck is even going on? And, of course, guys like Kerry and Gore, they're getting their medals because of their lifelong commitment to trying to take away power from you and then use it to control the weather. For more on all of this, I want to bring in Marc Morano, now the publisher of Climate Depot and the author of the book, The Great Reset, Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. Marc, good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you, Vince. Happy to be here. The Presidential Medal of Freedom. Wow, it's an amazing honor for these. Like they're going to do a Mount Rushmore carving next, I think, for these three: Bloomberg and Kerry and Gore.
It's just amazing, and what a self-licking ice cream cone this is. I mean, these guys, they're like, we've got to control the weather. There's a huge crisis, and then they insist it, and then they give them a Medal of Freedom to suggest that there's some legitimacy to the arguments that they're making.
Yeah, and, the person who's missing is Jeff Bezos. I can't believe the Biden administration must have slighted him. He should have been up there. All these other, Kerry, I guess, is a billionaire by virtue of his marriage. And obviously, Al Gore is on a quest to be the world's first carbon billionaire. He left the vice presidency in 2001 with about a $1 million net worth. Fast forward about 15 years, and he was literally worth at least $100 million. And
Wow.
Then he sold his network to Al Jazeera. Then he went on this fake meat quest with all this, contracts. At one point, he was getting close to $1 billion. I since think
Wow.
he's lost a lot of wealth.
Wow.
But it pays.
$1 billion. Those are the kind of sacrifices he's making to save the planet, Mark, just to become a billionaire. It is such a fraud, and it's so unfortunate that the government just keeps on doing it. And they get endorsements from big newspapers here in the United States too, and all across the planet. The Washington Post had an editorial board column recently headlined "Humans Might Need to Re-Engineer the Climate." And they're now flirting with a forbidden subject called geoengineering. Geoengineering. What in the world is geoengineering?
Well, this is the Jeff Bezos owned newspaper, first of all. So this is the editorial board. That's an important distinction. This isn't an op-ed contributor. This isn't some columnist who claim this. These are people who get direct paychecks from Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos is at all these UN climate summits. I've been to 19 out of the last 21 international summits, everywhere from Egypt to Argentina to Kenya. This one's in Azerbaijan in this November coming up. Jeff Bezos is an integral part of this climate movement. He's actually very close in the heels of Bill Gates in buying up U.S. farmland. He's now becoming one of the major owners of that. So what this is the Washington Post editorial board claiming we need to alter the weather permanently by permanently re-engineering the climate. This is based on dimming the sun. So what the Washington Post wants to do is inject sulfur, which is essentially a pollutant. If you remember acid rain, if you remember coal scrubbers, this is what we've tried to do for decades, clean up our air. And one of this, by the way, is a setup to this. New studies are coming out saying we've cleaned up the air so much, we've accelerated global warming. Our air is too clean. There's actually peer-reviewed studies claiming that. So what the Washington Post wants to do is inject these chemicals in the sky, block the sun, create global dimming, and thus cool the earth and save humanity.
Well, there'd be no downside to humanity dimming the sun, would there?
This is even by the proponents called radical, risky experiments on our atmosphere. Keep in mind, this has been going on. Bill Gates funding billions of dollars to Harvard University to do this research to figure out how to dim the sun. Let's go back, Vince, to the 1970s. The 1970s, before fossil fuels caused global warming, fossil fuels allegedly caused man-made global cooling in the 1970s.
Right.
We had NASA papers. You had all these attempts to geoengineer the climate. Then they thought the aerosols from our fossil fuels were blocking out the sun. They were worried so much that they proposed ideas like detonating nuclear energy on the ice caps to melt them because they thought they were growing too hard. They wanted to put black soot on Arctic ice to make it melt faster so it would absorb more of the sunlight. So they had these same ideas of geoengineering for decades. And CBS this morning, interestingly enough, did a segment with an NYU professor, a physicist, who talked about during the Vietnam War, how the U.S. government was doing weather control and creating floods to wash out the Viet Cong. And the CBS anchor was very uncomfortable, saying, allegedly, allegedly. We have now cloud seeding going on in at least 10 or 12 dozen Western states. We know this because the ABC meteorologist Ginger Z went on The View with Whoopi Goldberg and was bragging about all these attempts now by government and academia. They're doing all sorts of different what they call weather modification, which is a little different. This is different now than the geoengineering, but it's all part of the same thing. China actually has a department of weather modification that employs tens of thousands of employees as they try. So, Brennan, the former CIA director, intelligence official, has bragged about how this is going to be a national security secret weapon, weather modification and climate geoengineering in the future. Our ruling class elites have been trying to do this for 50 plus years. I don't think they've had too much success with doing it, but it's just frightening, the concept. And the concept works of dimming the sun. We had Mount Pinatubo, the early 90s, sent out the plumes of ash, volcanic dust, and we actually did see global cooling for a year or two because it blocked out the sun. So the concept is sound, but you really want megalomaniacal maniacs like Bill Gates funded research injecting this stuff and experimenting on our planet Earth.
I love that they're trying to push us all to solar just before they dim the sun. I don't know. How does that add up, right? That doesn't even make any sense. One of the other pieces that I remember, somewhere in my memory, I'm thinking about that I saw a study recently saying that that scientists had underestimated the cooling effect of clouds, that just normal rain clouds help cool things down. Having stood under a cloud before, I'm familiar with this phenomenon. How did scientists miss that? And wouldn't global warming, if this is a big threat, wouldn't global warming lead to more cloud cover, which would in turn lead to more cooling?
Yes, you would think that there's many scientists. When I was working in the Senate, U.S. Senate Environment Public Works Committee, and my job was to collect the names of dissenting scientists from the UN. And I had over 400 by 2007, over 1,000 by 2010. One of the key factors of this dissent was the idea that the UN climate panel never looked at the effects of clouds. In fact, the whole premise of global warming is based on carbon dioxide being the control knob of the climate. The UN panel was formed in 1988. That was the sort of watershed year of this whole thing. The NASA scientists came out and said that, the Earth is boiling and all this, James Hansen. And so what they've done is this is self-serving prophecy. In other words, self-serving lobbying organization. If they fail to find carbon dioxide the control knob, they no longer get to have these annual conferences. As a bonus, they no longer get to be in charge with the solutions, with these UN climate pacts, net zero agreements. So one of the things they do is ignore the cloud cover. They ignore the literally hundreds of other factors that influence global temperature. And that includes everything from tilt of the Earth's axis, ocean cycles, volcanoes, clouds, water vapor, methane, all these other factors. They just basically try to scream out, no, CO2 is the control knob. And that's where we've had scientists say, the idea that they're going to pick one politically selected factor, carbon dioxide, and claim it's the control knob is scientific nonsense. And yet that's what we've been subjected to 35, 40 plus years since this started. Running full steam. And you're absolutely right, though, about the clouds. There's so many different factors. There was in the ClimateGate emails, Vince, they actually had top UN officials lament that solar scientists were blaming the sun for the recent warming trend since the late 1970s. And they actually say in these emails that they never thought would be public, we have to threaten these journal editors, make sure these scientists don't get published. We have to go after funding. This was a top organization, like running a campaign to suppress any other scientific views. And we all saw this before, Vince. We saw it happen in real time before everyone's eyes with COVID, with the lockdowns, with mask mandates. Any scientist who dissented, didn't matter if it was Nobel Prize winning chemist Michael Levitt or the Barrington Declaration, they were deplatformed, canceled, suppressed. uninvited to scientific conferences.
Well, that I was just about to say. I mean, that we definitely have seen this movie before, and it's in the realm of COVID. Easy for us to understand. What's going on here, which is they lied about the masks, they lied about the origins, they tried to cover up all of the countervailing evidence that existed, all of that. If you had to assess, if you had to guess, and perhaps with ClimateGate, we actually know some of the answers here. How much more or less oppressive is the scientific community around this issue than, say, COVID?
Well, I like to say there's a book in the 80s, everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten. It was a popular book like 1985. So everything that happened in COVID, I had already seen and witnessed firsthand in the climate debate, which I've been engaged in for over 2 decades. So it's a good question. I think COVID was more intense only because it was a much shorter, immediate timescale, beginning really rapidly, beginning in January 2020, when the World Health Organization sent a sham investigative committee to China. This actually happened. And at the end of January, these World Health Organization said, if you want to stop a virus, follow what China is doing. The exact phrase was copy China. And what was China doing? Locking down their people with literally nails and concrete and boards as they wore hazmat suits.
Right.
That's how insane it became. So what happened was, they needed they treated us like we were privates in the Army and they were generals.
And the World Health Organization, I just want to emphasize, the World Health Organization was captured by China. Dr. Tedros, who runs it, was placed there by China.
Not only were they placed by China, but the other person who's the number one single donor is none other than Bill Gates. And now, of course, they're pushing this pandemic treaty. Think of that as similar to a UN climate treaty. They're coming up in a couple of weeks in Geneva, Switzerland. This is the World Health Pandemic Treaty and all the amendments. They literally want to be able to have Bill Gates-funded scientists, beholden to China, ideological with Tedros, declare instant global lockdowns. All they have to do is declare another pandemic. They're already working on disease X. And we can have no outliers this time. There'll be no Ron DeSantis in Florida. There'll be no Sweden that didn't lock down. They're looking for total cooperation. The Biden administration, of course, is all in beyond what the World Health Organization wants to do with this treaty. And the other weird thing is they're combining climate change now as a public health threat because the climate activists know that it's easier to scare people with public health, grandma's going to die, your kid's going to die, than it is worrying about polar bears or Florida underwater or, your beach house being washed away. So they had 200 medical journals, British Medical Journal, and 200 others urge the UN World Health to declare climate change a public health threat. And that's where we're headed, a merging of climate into the public health specter.
And as a political prediction, do you think that Biden will declare a climate emergency before the election?
It's the third time they've floated it. This latest time they floated this to the media, they've released it to Bloomberg News. The whole point of the rumors that the White House is controlling the leaks is they will do it before the election. And the idea would be to show Joe Biden as this muscular president, that he's in charge of of fighting climate change to shore up his youthful base, which these youth climate activists and the AOC Green New Deal wing of the Democratic Party. But it's hard. I'm hoping there would be major blowback. Again, 130 executive powers by which you could bypass democracy. Let's hope it would wake up the Republicans. We had a Columbia University professor on CBS News last week actually say this will give Joe Biden, a climate emergency, would give him new powers by which to fight climate change. To actually have a tenured professor at a major university say that the president needs powers, it's like going back to medieval witchcraft. It's literally, that's what we're going back, saying these witches have the power to control the weather. We need the power to sentence them to death. That's really what they're doing. And so that would give Joe Biden the ability in 3 major sectors, energy, transportation, and food, to just put the screws down bypassing Congress to do it under a declared climate emergency.
All right. Marc Morano, thank you as always. Excellent analysis. Really appreciate your time today, sir. Have a great weekend. To the phones we go. Jack calling in from Falls Church, now line 2. Jack, good afternoon. You are on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello, sir.
Hi, how are you doing today?
So good, Jack. What's on your mind?
Well, a little bit of history here about the whole Jewish-Palestinian state.
Yeah.
The Jews went to the land of Canaan about 950 B.C. The land of Canaan is where they are now. So they were there probably 3 or 4 years before the Philistines attempted to invade them and overthrow them. Well, the Philistines is what became the Palestinians today. My mother was born in what was then the country of Palestine in the city of Jerusalem in 1926. So I have a little bit of history here on the whole Jewish thing. Now, back then, we had the League of Nations, which was the forerunner of I guess, NATO today, kind of in a loose way. But the League of Nations had a treaty, I guess would be the best way to put it, with Palestine. Palestine was actually ruled by a triumvirate of Jews, Arabs, and Philistines, Palestinians. So they lived in relative peace, and Palestine was there until the British got rid of the country of Palestine at the end of World War II. There's your brief history of this.
Sure. There's a great series of books on the subject, too. It's called The Bible, which might illuminate might illuminate some of this. I do love the chatter about, like, the left operates under this thing. Well, the original people who are here are the only ones who are ever allowed to be here. Well, under that rubric, that's the Jewish people. So I don't even know what you're talking about. And also, by the way, like, throughout all of history, we really do have, various people conquering various areas, and now they control that land. And Israel clearly controls the territory that they're in. So I don't know what you want me to say.
Yeah, they just basically went back to where they were originally, over 1,900 years ago, 2,000. Good, I can't add. My adding and subtracting is not working today, but however many years it's been.
Well, your history's going great, though, so thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I try to explain this to people. There was a rally here in one of the colleges in Northern Virginia.
Sure.
And I went to it, and I said, hey, look, guys, my mom was born in Palestine in 1926. And they was, hooray, hooray. And I'm like, my next comment was, and she would be the first person to say that Hamas should be destroyed because there is no valid reason for murdering children and raping women and children.
How'd that go over?
I got booed off the stage, and people were threatening to kick me and stab me. And
they kicked you, you said?
They were threatening to kick me, stab me, and kill me. And I just had to back away and leave them.
Yeah.
It's like, it was okay as long as I was actually a Palestinian by blood. But as soon as I advocated against Hamas, that was the end of it.
Jack, well, there's a reason for that. It's because facts and information is not supposed to break its way into the radicalism. That's the explanation for that. In fact, today at GW University, I'm seeing some tweets. They say the faculty, I don't know, staff, I don't know who did this, but they have a big American flag now hanging from the top of one of their school buildings facing the anti-Israel commies standing there on campus. The commies booing, yelling vulgarities at the American flag, just to give you a sense of where their loyalties lie. Coming up, we're going to talk to Mike McCormick. He's got some thoughts on the Biden family, some new information to share with you. That's ahead. Well, good afternoon to you. It's Friday. Great to have you with us. It's 5:35 here. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I'm having trouble tracking who Joe Biden's relatives are. Remember he claimed his Uncle Bozy was eaten by cannibals in Papua New Guinea, and he caused yet another international crisis as yet another country was like, hey, don't say our people ate your uncle. That didn't happen. Also, U.S. government records show that didn't actually happen. Biden, just a moment ago at that Medal of Freedom ceremony where he's devaluing the whole point of that high civilian honor by giving it to his crony friends, he said something about Ambrose Finnegan, now referring to him as his grandfather.
And I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, hearing from my grandpa, whose name was Ambrose Finnegan. And, he was an All-American at Santa Clara, playing football back in 1905.
Until he was eaten by cannibals? Is he your uncle or your grandfather? This family tree is very difficult to follow. My next guest has been following the Biden family tree for some time. He's been tracking not only their whereabouts, but also how they make all their money. Joining us now is Mike McCormick. He is the author of The Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil Substack and a former stenographer for Joe Biden for many years, from 2011 to 2017. Mike, good to have you with us.
Thanks, Vince. It's great to be back on.
And do you know the Biden family tree? Who is this Uncle Bozy? Do we really know?
Yeah, I can break it down for you. So Ambrose Finnegan was Jean Finnegan's dad. She had brothers. So Uncle Bozy was one of her brothers. He died in the Pacific. Then she had two other brothers, and she was married in Scranton, and then they had to move to Claymont, Delaware. So Ambrose was always the grandfather, and he stayed in Scranton. But eventually, some of the brothers went down and lived with Joe in Claymont with his sister. I mean, with their sister, his mom.
So he had an uncle and a grandfather named Ambrose.
I think the uncle's Bozy was a different name, and so it was not. It was a different name, so not Ambrose, but something like that.
Okay, all right. I think I'm following. It hardly matters, though. Anyway, his uncle was eaten by cannibals, he claimed, and that was not true. One of many things he said that's not true. All right, so let me move to the issue that I wanted to talk about with you, which is, all these years later after COVID emerged in early 2020, we're still trying to get answers on everything. Earlier this week, the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic was asking questions, and both Republicans and Democrats, actually, to their credit, were grilling a guy called Peter Daszak with the EcoHealth Alliance. And they were asking him all sorts of questions about the emergence of this virus and whether or not U.S. taxpayer money went into its Frankenstein monster-like creation. Peter Daszak was dodging like crazy, acting like he had nothing to do with any of this. But what do you make of all of it, Mike?
Oh. Well, there's a dirty, dark secret behind this. He's dodging it, and frankly, the Oversight Committee questions were also part of the dodge. They didn't ask questions they should have. I went down and talked to the Oversight Committee a year ago in an informal interview. I told them all I knew about Hunter and Joe Biden's involvement with Burisma, but they were also involved in another company called Metabiota, and Metabiota worked hand in glove with Peter Daszak's EcoHealth Alliance during there was pandemic research conducted in China from 2009 through 2016, and EcoHealth Alliance and Metabiota were hand in glove with that. And Hunter Biden was an investor in Metabiota, and it came at a very suspicious time. So, remember, yeah.
Let me just pause on this because I want to make sure that you're introducing names and things, and I want to make sure that people can follow because so Metabiota, as I understand it, is a company that purports to be in the business of predicting pandemics. Does that make sense? Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Silicon Valley Biotech.
Okay. And so that is also supposedly what Peter Daszak's EcoHealth Alliance was engaged in. They were taking all sorts of federal funding, and then they were directing it to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And the concept was there that they would be studying emerging viruses in the hopes that they could predict and help to respond to the potential of killer viruses, a future pandemic. And that's really where the origins of COVID story begins to get really hairy, because the question is, well, how much were they souping up viruses, and to what extent did one potentially leak that ran roughshod across the planet? So you're pointing out that Hunter Biden it was an investor in this Metabiota company, and that it was linked up with EcoHealth Alliance, which is at the center of all of this scrutiny about the origins of COVID. Am I following correctly?
Yeah, that's right. And EcoHealth Alliance was basically doing virology experiments with the Wuhan Institute of Virology in like 2012, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And Metabiota was over there working with them. They were under a grant from the Rockefeller organization and some USAID money in an organization called Predict One. And so they're over there. Metabiota's job was basically they were software. So they analyzed what the viruses that were collected and looked at. Basically, EcoHealth Alliance and these guys are going into the jungles and caves and picking up samples of viruses from animals.
Yeah, bat poop. That's what they were studying.
all that kind of stuff. And then they would, what Metabiota did was they would decide, well, let's look at a scan of these viruses and see how bad of a pandemic can come from it. So that was their side of it. They were the pandemic predictor. So, Hunter and Joe go to Beijing in 2013 in December. A week after they get back is when Hunter starts investing in Metabiota. At the time, Metabiota was in China investigating bat viruses with EcoHealth Alliance. And Joe had a long, suspicious meeting with Xi Jinping during that time. Joe Biden is the vice president. He has a 4-hour meeting with Xi Jinping. It was only supposed to be an hour. And he hijacks the meeting to have this big, long talk.
This was late 2013?
Yeah, December. Okay. And then that kicks off Hunter's, as soon as they get back from that, Hunter starts investing in Metabiota. Metabiota goes on from there and starts getting government contracts like it's never gotten before. $18 million about 2 months later to do a bio research program in the Republic of Georgia, right on the doorstep of Russia. And then they start plugging after Hunter. They go to his office in Georgetown and they set up camp and they put together a prospectus to do research in Ukraine. That's the bio labs. Hunter has him in his office in Ukraine in April 2014. He and his partner, and the investing group that's investing in Metabiota that Hunter leads is called Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners.
Yes.
There's 5 people in it. 4 of those 5 people wind up meeting with either Joe Biden or Joe Biden staffers in the White House a week before Joe Biden goes to Ukraine on April 21st, 2014.
I'm listening to you say all this, and I'm thinking, like, is it possible that every single news story all intersects through Hunter Biden? Like every issue that we're even dealing with, it all intersects and goes through the Biden family? So, the bio labs that you're referring to in Ukraine have long been explained to the American public as, well, they were disarming old Russian chemical weapons and the inside of these bio labs in Ukraine. But you're saying that this Metabiota company, in which Hunter Biden's company, as I understand it, had a 13.4% stake in. Hunter Biden's company
yes.
did.
Right.
They were involved in connections with everything, including partnership with the EcoHealth Alliance and the work that was going on in Wuhan, as well as being involved with the biolabs in Ukraine. Is it possible the Bidens are involved in all of these stories?
Oh, there's more. Remember in 2014, there was something called Ebola.
Yes.
Metabiota had a lab in Kenema, Sierra Leone, and they were doing suspicious work there in Sierra Leone. They got cited by the World Health Organization for poor lab conduct activities. And that's in 2014. So in 2014, out of Metabiota, their investment in Metabiota and this Ebola crisis, Barack Obama names one of Joe's top operatives, Ron Klain, as the Ebola czar. And he moves into the White House and starts working on they call it biodefense. It's also biowarfare. And Hunter's group is investing in one of the companies that he's working with. And just then, the company, Metabiota, gets an email from the CIA. There's a venture capital arm of the CIA called InQtel. They get in touch with the leader of Metabiota, a guy named Nathan Wolf, and he sends an email to these Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners guys. Hey, I just heard from InQtel. Do you know anybody there? Well, this starts this process where weeks later, Barack Obama goes to China and sets up an infectious disease research alliance with China, an agreement. We're going to come over to China and do infectious disease research because they had just frozen the gain of function research in America. They put a moratorium out on it on the exact day that Ron Klain was named as the Ebola czar, exact same day. We're not doing any more gain of function here in America, but we'll do infectious disease research in China. That's where Metabiota, EcoHealth Alliance, Wuhan Institute of Virology go over to Wuhan and they start doing all the dirty stuff.
Really is amazing. I mean, this is and I don't know about the audience. I mean, even for me, I'm sitting here going, I'm trying to follow all the details because there's a lot here, and which means that it's going to take some more time to unpack a lot of this. And you know, this Nathan Wolfe, you mentioned the name you mentioned a moment ago, who is the founder of Metabiota, right? The company in which Hunter Biden's invested.
Right.
He I'm looking at his bio. He's also a member of DARPA's Defense Science Research Council. He's a DARPA guy too.
DARPA guy. He's a World Economic Forum Golden Boy. He was friends with Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh, there's an Epstein connection too. I'm sorry, I forgot to make sure there was an Epstein connection. So there's an Epstein connection in here.
Yeah, I'll be covering a lot of this as it comes out in my Substack, Midnight and Laptop of Good and Evil. And this was too hot for me to put in my book. You know, my book, The Case to Impeach and Imprison Joe Biden, I wrote that knowing all this stuff about Metabiota, but I couldn't put it in there because I told all this to the Oversight Committee guys, and they don't want to touch it. They don't want to touch it. They don't want to put any of this under the microscope in federal, the hearings.
You know, here's let's talk about the intel community for a second, because remember the EcoHealth Alliance presented a grant proposal to DARPA before they finally secured funding through a different path, through Anthony Fauci. But they had presented back in, I think it was 2018, they had sent in a DARPA grant proposal, and the description in the proposal of how they were going to modify a virus looked exactly like what COVID looked like in the end. According to virologists who've looked at this, are like, man, that looks suspiciously like COVID. In fact, I remember one of the analogies that was used was the proposal described how they would attach a horn to a horse, and then a couple years later, all of a sudden, unicorns are popping out everywhere. They're like, well, kind of seems like that was the proposal. Now, at the time, what we're told in retrospect is that DARPA turned down that grant. They didn't give EcoHealth the grant, but EcoHealth Alliance was able to get a grant for a slightly different project, I guess, from Anthony Fauci. But as you look at all of this, you start to see all these connections, and you're like, holy cow. And the intel community especially, here's what I wanted to get to with you, Mike. You know, we keep hearing about how intimidated members of Congress are by the intel community and how beaten into submission they are by anything the intel community wants or doesn't want. How much of a role do you think that plays in the reticence to dig into the things that you're talking about?
Oh, that's exactly right on head, hammer on the nail head. In 2017, Mike Pompeo's CIA invested in Metabiota. They came out and announced it through In-Q-Tel. Mm-hmm. And at the time, Metabiota was trying to set up this, hey, there's a pandemic coming, we've got insurance for you. And that's what they invested in, that product they set up. And so the intel community is all through this. And Fauci is part of it, and Ron Klain is part of it, all through it. And there's a really dark chapter that happens right before Trump comes in. And that's in 2017 in January.
Well, that's, of course, a huge and leading tease. So the dark chapter is what? Can you share any of that with us?
I can share, as briefly as I can. So they reinstated gain of function in a White House meeting. In that White House meeting, Obama would later credit Lisa Monaco as the person who was helping him. Lisa Monaco, Avril Haines, who's now our Director of National Intelligence, who came to the National Security Council, Obama's National Security Council, from the CIA, and Susan Rice were critical to that decision-making process with Fauci and Collins in the White House. Days later, Biden goes to Ukraine and meets with the Ukraine president, and then he goes to World Economic Forum and meets with Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping had his only trip to the World Economic Forum, and Joe Biden met with him privately. There was no press on that. And days later, they come back. Oh, and after Joe leaves there and starts heading back to the United States, Bill Gates announces a great new way to set up a vaccine program. He called it at the time DNA RNA vaccines. And that's what became the vaccines that we now know are very questionable.
Yeah, as the New York Times says today. Okay, thank you very much, Mike McCormick. Always fun to talk to you, and you've got a big task ahead of you as you lay all of this out in your excellent Substack. Thank you, Mike. Good to talk to you again, as always. You know, from top to bottom, the left, so many on the left have no perspective whatsoever. It's gotten to the point where people like Al Sharpton have to talk sense into Morning Joe, or Don Lemon on his own podcast has to tell lefties, whoa, you're sounding a little crazy. Taylor Lorenz is I don't know, she's kind of an emotionally traumatized columnist who works for the Washington Post. She was on Don Lemon's web show this week, and Don Lemon had to explain to her that, no, gay people are not treated well in Gaza.
Well, then, Taylor, how do you reconcile the way marginalized groups, many of the people in these marginalized groups, obviously they are fighting for Palestine, right, for the Palestinians and for what's happening in Gaza. But yet in Gaza, they would not have any freedom. You know,
they don't have freedoms in Texas and Florida. Does that mean?
But they don't. But I understand that. But Taylor, I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. If I go to Texas, they're not going to throw me off of a roof. They're not going. Well, then, Taylor.
Don Lemon's like, okay, well, let's not get crazy. Didn't he say an airplane disappeared into a black hole? He's off for crazy theories, but he's like, it's a little intense to say. As a member of the LGBT community, he says, I wouldn't be thrown off a roof in Texas. Gaza? Yeah, roof throwing. That's how they operate there. Taylor thinks that's ridiculous because her brain doesn't work. Hey, the great one, Mark Levin, is up next right here on WMA. I'll talk to you Monday.